What if the only surviving image of Katherine Howard has been hiding in plain sight for nearly 500 years? Though there are no confirmed portraits of her, some historians believe a stained glass window in the chapel of King's College, Cambridge, is Henry VIII's most tragic wife. In this video from History Calling, I analyse the evidence, tell you the serious error regarding this window that some prominent writers who have written about Henry's fifth queen have made, and ask, is this the real face of Katherine Howard? Katherine Howard was born somewhere between 1521 and 1523. I have a video explaining how I came up with those dates, which I'll leave linked for you. She was married to Henry VIII as his fifth wife in July 1540, arrested in November 1541 for supposed adultery, stripped of her title and executed on his orders in February 1542. There are no confirmed portraits of her taken during her lifetime, though I believe that a Hans Holbein miniature, which exists in two copies, showing a woman with red-brown hair, a French hood, and wearing the Tudor consort's necklace, is her, and I have another video looking at her supposed paintings, which explains why I believe that in more detail, and which I'll also link for you. For decades, however, there has been speculation that a window in the chapel of King's College, Cambridge, shows this doomed Tudor queen. The windows in the chapel depict a number of biblical scenes, and this one in particular, which is known as Window 4, shows the Queen of Sheba presenting gifts to King Solomon, a story which appears twice in the Bible, once in the Book of Kings, once in Chronicles. It is generally accepted, at least in all the secondary material I read for this video, that the figure of Solomon with his red hair and beard, fabulous clothes, and gold chain of office is based on Henry VIII. This is only hammered home further by the appearance of the king's HR monogram on a shield held up by a male figure appearing at the top of the panel. Another reason for making this connection is that this wouldn't have been the first time Henry had been presented as the biblical king. An earlier image, dated to around 1535 and created in miniature by Hans Holbein the Younger, is now held by the Royal Collection Trust. And in it, Holbein, it seems, did deliberately depict Henry as Solomon, though I think it's just a passing resemblance rather than an attempt at a truly lifelike image. The Trust says only that their image is suggestive of portraits of Henry. It also features the Queen of Sheba, by the way, though in this case her face is unseen. As the Trust's website explains, there were strong reasons in 1535, which was in the midst of the English Reformation, during which Henry split from the Catholic Church in Rome and declared himself head of the Church in England, to show him in such a guise, for the image, quote, refers to the establishment of the Church of England with Henry VIII as supreme governor, in whom both temporal and spiritual power were vested. Holbein's composition uses biblical narrative to illustrate the redefinition of Henry VIII's power. The central figure of the king is shown as Solomon, enthroned, wearing a crown and holding a scepter. On the steps of the throne, seen in profile, is the Queen of Sheba, the personification of the church, in the act of addressing the king. Her salutation is inscribed in Latin on either side of the throne and on the curtain. It ordains that the power which is given to Solomon, and so by extension to Henry VIII himself, comes from God alone. The theory goes that the Cambridge window was created fairly soon after, and followed the same idea of inserting then living figures into biblical images. It is because Solomon is taken to be Henry that we get the theory that the figure of the Queen of Sheba is potentially based on whoever his wife was at the time that the window was created, and we'll get to what we know about its creation date in a minute. She is shown kneeling down in profile with only the left side of her face visible and offering up a gift to Solomon. She wears a voluminous dress with a white, gold and red skirt, green sleeves and bodice with red, white and gold detailing on it, and a white and gold headdress which covers up all of her hair and her ears. We can get little sense of her appearance. She has pale skin, an oval face with a high forehead and a long straight nose, but beyond that I don't think we can say much else about her. In fact, even if it is meant to be Kathryn, I think we would still need to take the image with a large pinch of salt. Other than the fact that Solomon has a red beard, I don't think he particularly looks like Henry, but it does seem almost beyond dispute that he is meant to be based on the king, in which case I'd say he's been airbrushed, to use a modern word. This in turn means we'd have to question the accuracy of any other figure in the image based on a real person too. That brings us on to the question of whether the window dates to the correct time frame to show Kathryn, and what we know about its construction. It was created, along with more than 20 other windows, during Henry VIII's reign, and we know from surviving documentation that a Mr. Barnard Flower was hired to design and install these windows, and started the installation in 1516. He then died in 1517 though, having only put up 4 windows, and the project stalled. He was eventually replaced in 1526 by the new king's glazier Gallion Hone from Holland, plus 3 other glaziers called William Bund, Thomas Reeve and James Nicholson, who specifically stated in their contract that the east and west windows were among those still to be installed, along with 16 more in between them, along the north and south walls. The plan was to have everything done and dusted by 1531, but that didn't happen, despite the hiring of an additional 2 glaziers, Francis Williamson and Simon Simmons, quite soon after the project had resumed. In fact, the glazing was never finished in the Tudor period, for once Henry VIII died in January 1547 and his hardline Protestant son Edward VI came to the throne, there was no impetus to continue with a scheme for showing biblical scenes in windows. It was considered a bit too close to Catholic iconography. In fact, the west window was only finally given stained glass instead of clear by the Victorians in the 1870s. All we can really say about window 4 is that if it was based on Holbein's image, and that seems like a reasonable assumption to me, then that would date it to circa 1535 or later, and the decision to show Henry in a pose which depicted him as the head of the church certainly suggests that it dates to after the official split from Rome too, which occurred in 1534. However, while it could therefore date to the 16 months that Kathryn was queen before her arrest, I don't see anything to suggest that it definitely does so. One reason I think some people date the window more closely to Kathryn's time as queen is that they make the mistake, and I've seen this in a couple of major works on Kathryn, which I'll circle back to in a minute, of confusing the Queen of Sheba window, window 4, with the east window in the chapel. However, one look at that east window and you can see that the Solomon and Queen of Sheba panels don't appear in it. However, because it includes both the feathers of the Prince of Wales, a clear reference to the future Edward VI, born in October 1537, and the initials H and K, once the mistake of associating it with the Queen of Sheba window has occurred, those making that error assume that the window must date to between Henry's marriage to Katherine Howard in 1540 and his death in 1547, and that the Queen of Sheba could therefore be either his 5th or 6th queen, the 6th being Catherine Parr, who he married in 1543. In actual fact, despite the fact that Antonia Fraser says that this side window is of about the same period as the east window, I'm not aware of any evidence that convincingly suggests that it went up that late. As I've said, I'd be comfortable, given the similarities to the Holbein image, the manner in which the window portrays Henry and the historical context of the Reformation, which I've already discussed, to date it to 1535 or later, but that's as far as I'd go. Carola Hicks, whose 2007 book, The King's Glass, linked below, gives a good history of the stained glass windows in the chapel, does not date the Queen of Sheba window any more precisely either. Given this fairly broad date range, I am therefore very dubious about connecting it to Katherine Howard. In fact, I'm dubious about connecting it to any particular person. The Queen of Sheba's face might just be an imagined one, or based on any random woman that the artist knew, and if it is meant to be Henry's queen, a date of anywhere from 1535 to the end of his reign puts every wife save Catherine of Aragon into play. Let's turn now to how the Queen of Sheba compares to other supposed portraits of Katherine Howard. As I've said, there are no confirmed images of her, but the Holbein miniature and images in the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the Yale Centre for British Art are all associated with her. I think the Holbein one has the strongest claim to authenticity, but really, no matter which of the images you compare the ruler of Sheba to, none of them really resembles her, partly because there is just so little of her face on display in the window to make such a comparison. As for Henry's second, third, fourth, and sixth queens, we do have securely identified images of them available for comparison, but I have to say that I don't see any resemblance between them and the window either. Finally, if the window is Katherine Howard, it is strange that Henry VIII did not have it removed after her disgrace and death, and that no contemporary or near-contemporary source associates it with her. Instead, this is a very modern theory which I have not been able to trace any further back than the 20th century. It does not appear, for instance, in a 1769 guidebook to the chapel written by Henry Malden, and the earliest suggestion I have found that the window shows her comes from Hilary Waymont's 1982 book, King's College Chapel, Cambridge, The Great Windows, Introduction and Guide. Annoyingly, however, I have to admit that I couldn't see that book myself. I've just seen it cited in other works, so I don't know precisely what it says. I also found an earlier reference to Solomon being Henry VIII in a 1955 book by Christopher Morris. Now, I don't know if these are actually the oldest references to these ideas, but certainly by the 1990s, the idea that Catherine's picture might be preserved in the window was taking a firm hold, even if the authors expressing it were often quite circumspect about it. Lady Antonia Fraser, in her 1992 book on Henry's wives, which is the same book I was referencing a couple of minutes ago, says only that a deliberate resemblance to Henry VIII himself has been discovered in the face of King Solomon, probably painted by Galen Hone. In which case, it may well be that the figure of the Queen of Sheba, seen in profile with her short nose, I think it looks long, which just shows how opinions can vary, and full lips, sensual and suppliant, presenting gifts to Solomon, preserves, however fleetingly, the likeness of Katherine Howard. Just to remind you, she stated, without explaining why she thought so unfortunately, that the East window and the Queen of Sheba window were created at about the same time, which is why she would have thought that the Sheba window likely dated to Catherine's time of queen and has not considered any earlier wife. She cites Hilary Waymont elsewhere in her discussion of the window, and I wonder if this is something that other author said. Again, it's frustrating to me that I wasn't able to access Waymont's book myself to double check this. The idea that Katherine is the Queen of Sheba has popped up again in many books about her and the Tudors more generally in the years since, though different authors express widely varying degrees of certainty about the identification. For example, in David Lode's 2011 book on Henry VIII, I saw a picture of the window labelled definitively as Katherine Howard, Henry's fifth wife, as the Queen of Sheba. In a 2014 book by Terry Breverton, the author was equally unwavering, writing, Henry VIII's fifth wife, Katherine Howard, is depicted as the Queen of Sheba, with Henry VIII as King Solomon in this stained glass window at King's College Chapel, Cambridge. Meanwhile, both Josephine Wilkinson in 2016 and Gareth Russell in 2017 wrote standalone biographies of Katherine in which they made the error of conflating the East window with window 4, and that is largely why they consider the identification as a possibility, though even at that, Russell still says that, quote, the depiction of the Queen of Sheba is neither clear nor detailed enough to provide us with much of an idea of the young queen's appearance. Carola Hicks, though, writing in 2007, was cognizant of the fact that the East window and window 4 are two separate entities, and she came down almost entirely against an identification of Katherine, saying, quote, Hone installed the Howard arms in various rooms at Ampthill Castle and in the former Priory of Rochester. However, after Katherine's fall, quote, a local glazier was hurriedly called in to remove her arms from all the windows. The popular identification of Katherine Howard as the Queen of Sheba in window 4 of King's College Chapel is hard to sustain, given her fate. End quote. So to sum up, I have serious doubts that window 4 in the chapel shows Katherine Howard. I've seen no evidence which allows us to securely date its installation to her queenship. In the absence of such evidence, it could theoretically show anyone from Anne Boleyn to Catherine Parr, if it's based on one of Henry's wives at all, or it might depict some other woman, or no genuine historical figure from the Tudor era at all. It doesn't resemble any portraits of Henry's fifth queen, no contemporary source links it to one of his wives, and we have to question if he would have left it in place after Kathryn's disgrace and death if it showed her. Even if it is her, it displays so little of the face that it would be of little use in determining her appearance. My advice, if you want to look at his penultimate wife, is to stick to the Holbein miniatures, one version of which is in the royal collection, with the other held by the Duke of Buccleuch. I hope you found that analysis of the window interesting. If you did, I'd be very grateful if you would give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. It shows YouTube my content is good quality and helps to promote it. If you want more history from me, you can also join my YouTube channel membership by clicking the join button under videos and following the on-screen instructions. Or you can head on over to my Patreon at patreon.com/historycalling and join up there to get extra perks, ranging from bonus podcasts to early access to ad-free videos, recommendations for other great history content on the web, and your name in my monthly patron lists, depending on which tier you join. A lot of my posts are also available as one-time purchases in my Patreon shop if you don't fancy a monthly subscription. Thank you too to those of you who support me using the thanks button underneath videos, as this is very much appreciated. But if you're unable to support financially, which is totally fine, I know not everyone can or wants to, but would still like some bonus material, sign up to my free mailing list on my website, historycallingofficial.com, to get 2 complimentary downloads right away about spotting good history books and interviewing family members about your family tree, as well as my monthly newsletter. I'll leave that link below for you, and you can of course unsubscribe at any time. Let me know below if you think the Queen of Sheba window shows Katherine Howard, and for more about Henry's most tragic queen, check out the list of videos on her which I've linked in the description box for you, or click one of these cards to get a biography of her, an analysis of her portraiture, a detailed discussion of her death, or the story about her disappearing remains, which weren't where they were supposed to be when the Victorians went digging. Whatever you choose, please enjoy, and until next time, keep learning.